My name is Thomas, and this is just going to be a quick run through of my RMI client server email program. The features that it has on it is allows a user to log in with their username and password. They can create a new account given the username and password. They can send a message which is multicasted to multiple recipients if they want to. They can check their messages, and it shows a little thing if they actually have messages. I'll show that later on. And they can exit, and when a user logs in or creates a new account, they're automatically registered, and when they exit they are then unregistered, and I'll show those later on. I'll just kind of do a quick run through of the application running. As you can see here, the email server is already running, and these are just print statements that kind of runs through it because it adds sample data. So I'll just run the client and we can see it working. So they can just leave it blank and it'll default to localhost. I'll create a new account. I'll just call it MMM and password of 000. And it says welcome for their first time, and they have, as you can see here, it easily shows them how many messages they have, which is 0 at the moment. So I will send a message now, and so I'll send it to AAA exists and BBB, and I'll send it to myself so you can see this part will change. That is then sent, and as you can see here it shows up that I now have one message. So if I go to view that message, this here is the message that I sent, and it now shows below that there's 0 messages. Since I read it, it's also been taken off the server as well. So if I now go press number 3 and exit, we can see here on the server display that the commands that I issued, first of all I added a new user. I was then automatically registered. I sent a message, and then when I logged out, I was then unregistered again. So if I log in as another user who also received the message, we can see that an existing user, so AAA, the message was also sent to them. So as you can see here, number 1 is displayed, so they also have a message. So if I press 1 to view that, we can see that the message was sent by MMM, which was the new account that I created, and it now shows 0 since the message has been read and it's been deleted from the server. So I shall log off that, and it's the same output again. So basically that is the RMI chat server working, and I'll just kind of go through some of the other things on it. Some of the good things with RMI was it's less protocol involved on the server side, so it's, once you kind of get the hang of it, it's quite quicker to implement. But unfortunately, one of the cons is also there's quite a lot of a learning curve compared to sockets, and some of the concepts are difficult to understand with implementing the interfaces and registering the right objects and implementing them to implement the interfaces and which ones to register. So again, it's difficult to implement if you don't fully understand it. So because you're using interfaces and other objects are implementing them, it also takes more planning on that half, since if you're just using basic POJOs, you don't really need to worry about that as much. One of the pros though is that it's very object oriented and method based, so it's quite quick to program with once you have it set up. Calling methods is very quick within your program to run. It's far less code, and RMI also automatically handles threads and the socket layer for you, so you don't need to worry about programming any of those. You just might need to synchronize some of your methods because Java can't do that automatically. One of the cons is RMI is a Java implementation, so it's not going to work with other languages, and that's again one of the benefits of sockets. When you're using RMI, there's security concerns, especially if you're using other versions of Java, which you might need to download the stub files, but since we're using Java 6, we didn't have that problem. With sockets, I found them a lot easier to code than RMI. Maybe it's because I'm still not fully familiar with how RMI works exactly, so that kind of was a bit harder to work with. Sockets, if you're building a simple application, I think sockets would be far easier to work with. They're quicker to implement. You don't need to worry about creating your stub files and uploading things to a registry and then having your interfaces connect with them. If you're using sockets, depending on what you want, you're given a lot more control. So depending on the program you're building, you might need to work with sockets instead of RMI, since you're given more control over your threads and the lower layers. It's also platform and language independent, so you could build a program in Java and have it send information through a socket and to someone that's building a C program using sockets. So in that way, it's also more backward compatible. Since RMI changed quite a lot in some of its versions, sockets relatively stayed the same. Some of the cons though with sockets are that the threads have to be handled by developers. If you're most likely you probably will want threads in your program, so they have to be manually handled. But that again, that's not a huge amount of code to worry about. It's more so just the tear down of threads afterwards, so that you don't overuse your resources. Sockets are very protocol independent, or sorry, protocol dependent on the client and server side. So whereas with RMI, you usually only have to create a protocol mostly on the client side, but with sockets you have to create your protocol on the server and the client, as you're sending kind of more primitive objects, so you have to state exactly which objects are going to be transferred at which time. So back in the application again, I tried to get callbacks to work on the client side, but unfortunately I couldn't get them to work. I had a registered users object, so it would keep track of users as they logged in, so you'd know which users were logged in at the time. And I was going to put in a who is online feature, but I didn't get a chance or enough time to actually do it. It's not exactly callback, but it would be I think it's slightly similar to it. But to get the client callback to work, I tried on one of the other ones to get it to work, but the code kept breaking on me. I think it was only something minor though, with the getting the implemented object and the interface to work on the client and server side. Because this is a multi-threaded program as well, we had to think of synchronization. So only some of the methods are synchronized, but to help with that, I also tried to use objects that were automatically thread safe. So a hash map isn't, but you can put it into a collection class that's synchronized, so that helps there. And on other objects, I tended to use vectors instead of array lists. The client code looks quite complicated compared to the server side, but most of it is just basically getting information from the user through the interface and then putting those variables into objects and then sending them across the network to the server. So if we look in the server code here, we can see it's actually quite small. This is just for starting up the email server and then putting objects into the registry. So here we're putting objects in and we're just putting them in under the interface names. And then once the objects are added into the registry, that starts up, and it's just the server implementation is then running on the registry, which can be accessed by the client and the client accesses those using the various interfaces, which are all here. These are in the utilities class, and I used to have these separated into the client and server classes, but when they were compiled, because they were in different classes and they were created into class files, the system seen them as separate files, so it couldn't cast one object to another. So when I put them into a common class, they use the same class file, so it could compile properly, and I didn't get class cast exceptions anymore. So I think then if I was distributing this across other systems, the utils package would have to go with both the client and the server, and I think that should then work if it was on multiple systems. We also put in the version IDs so that can help with versioning. Again, this is just a server implementation class. It's kind of acts like a facade that everything kind of goes through this front panel from the client side anyway. So if a client wants to add a new user, it just gets the interface, which is user interface here, and here they have add new user, login, and they can clear messages. But on the client, when they want to add a user, for example, it is just here they get an instance of the user interface, and they call the method add new user, and they just pass in a user object, which is what is specified here in the interface. But in the implementation, they're calling this method. So this then adds the new user to the base of users, and it also registers it at the same time. So that's the basic functionality of how the interface is used on the client side to call an object that's implemented on in the registry, and basically everything runs through the server implementation. So this class implements all of the other interfaces, and then the other objects it's kind of almost like a tiered system where a message is within a user class, and a user is within the database of users in user base, and the server implementation has a user base object. So from that point of view, pretty much everything can just be controlled through the server implementation. Lastly, if I was to develop an app or an application and given the choice between RMI and sockets, I would probably choose sockets because I found RMI quite complicated to use. RMI probably would be better in the long run and for bigger applications, but for a program like this, I found RMI quite complicated to use. And I think sockets are better for something that's kind of at this level of difficulty. But I think in the long run, RMI is more scalable and will be easier to handle and manage in the long run. So that is basically my RMI program, and thanks.